Hey guys, I'm Annabelle and today I'm going to be showing you how I made some vintage inspired plaid shorts. So I have these Slytherin style plaid shorts that I got from Black Milk and I'm absolutely obsessed with. I love that kind of vintage-esque style and the rolled up cuffed hem. And I also loved them in Ravenclaw blue, but that was going to get a bit pricey, so I decided to pick up some generic plaid school print and make my own. I started this in November, but I kind of did anything I could to put it off. For context, now it's the end of January and I needed to clear up all the books I got for Christmas off my desk and reorganize my rainbow bookshelf. I also got some new TARDIS bookends, which you may or not be able to see in this shot. Pretty cute. I think the end result actually ended up looking really nice. So there you go. Clean workspace, always important. Now the shorts. They have a side zip and no fly, which I thought would make this much easier as a project. However, the original has darts, 4, 2 in the front, 2 in the back. So that is going to be a pain to transfer, all a bit of a guessing game. I started tracing the front and the back along the seam lines. Make sure to do this and not where they fold in half naturally, because the back half is going to be a lot bigger and, you know, accuracy. The length of the darts were 10 centimeters in the front and 15 centimeters in the back, but the width we can't know since these had lining put in. I estimated about 5 centimeters for the front and 7 for the back. That's based off my sizing. I'm a size 6 UK and Australian and a size 2 US, I believe, if that helps you. Here are the measurements I used. The most important part is, if you're drafting these from scratch, to get that inseam sort of curved part of the pattern pretty accurate to a pair of shorts or pants you may already have, and that the waistline is all adding up minus the dart widths. I decided to make a mock-up of this on an old screen print test from university and went ahead and cut that out, making sure that you put in all the darts and seam allowances. After I sewed that up, I could see that the waist actually was really big and I obviously went wrong there somehow, but the darts were looking pretty good. There was an obvious goof with the side seams not matching up at all. I don't know why I thought a diagonal bottom was going to work out somehow, but there you go. That's why we do mock-ups. So I made new pattern pieces based on those assessments and I got to cutting those out, as well as 2 pockets for the back. I based these off just an old pair of denim shorts that I had, and I added double the seam allowance I usually do since we're folding the edges in twice. It's also good to add length to the shorts for wiggle room at the end. I didn't really care about matching up the plaid pattern perfectly, but if that does matter to you, don't cut it on the straight grain, because that didn't work for me. I did want the shorts on the diagonal for effect, and also factor in with your fabric that we're going to need either a waistband or facing, either or, and I hadn't decided at this point in the project, so I just left my fabric and went ahead with 2 front pieces, 2 back, and 2 pockets. First, you'll want to iron down all the edges twice on the pockets, like I said before. And if you can't be bothered to get out your ironing board like me, you can always get your cutting mat and put some fabric over that to protect it. Please note that that's a horrible idea and it and the desk will warp. That's a uniquely horrible idea. So I sewed down the top of the pocket, making sure I was catching in those vertical edges and that the stitching was really close to the inner edge, kind of like a top stitch. Real clean. What is that? Then we want to go and pin it to the back pieces of the shorts. I kind of eyeballed this and I feel like they ended up really far apart and low, but at the end of the day, they do what they need to. Make sure you kind of measure this more appropriately against existing shorts if you want that sort of store-bought feel. Then sew those down, making sure again you're going more toward the inside of that folded edge, just because you want to catch both folded sides. So it can get pretty tough around those corners. Make sure you just like slow down, manually sew around those pieces. We don't want you breaking a needle. Then you'll want to sew the front and the back seams. you want to sew the front to the front and the back to the back on that curved edge. Since this has no lining and I have no serger, I needed to finish those seams somehow. So I got out my pinking shears and I just cut along those. This kind of helps it stop fraying a little bit, and you could do a zigzag stitch like I know a lot of people suggest, but let's be honest, that wastes time, thread, and only gives about as good a result as this anyway. So I pinned the inner leg seam and tried them on sort of like a nappy, and I noticed that the waistband was just enormous. I mean, it's an easy fix, but how did, oh right, okay, darts, totally forgot to transfer those over. Noted. So I put those in. With the darts, you'll want to iron them back towards the center seam on all of those panels and iron open that center seam while you're at it as well. This time on an ironing board. Keeping that out is good incentive to keep going with your projects this time. So I tried it on again and it seemed to fit pretty well, which means my maths was winning out. So I decided at this point it would be really nice to have a deep side pocket since the back pockets were pretty shallow. But of course I can only add it to one side since we have a zipper on the left. So you'll want to sew the pocket pieces to the front and back sides accordingly, right sides together, both starting the same distance down so the pockets will eventually line up, and just sew straight down from the top of the pocket to the bottom. Okay, so start at the top, right sides together, pockets flipped out. You want to sew down until you get to the pocket, then turn on the sewing machine. Then you'll want to sew around that circumference, I guess, of the pocket. And now, since I wanted my pockets to be deeper than the opening of the pocket, this is where it gets a bit tricky. I sewed up until the pocket finished on the garment, backstitched, finished that, then went in and created a new seam down from where that backstitch started to the bottom of the shorts. I was actually really happy with how the pocket turned out. Once you iron it, it looks really professional. Who knew? Then I got the inner leg seam out of the way. You can do this at any point really. I think I did it at this point. I can't really tell from my footage anymore, but there you go. There's some footage of me sewing it. At that point, I decided I would go for a waistband instead of facing. So I decided to cut the waistband on the bias. Whether that's a good idea or not, who knows? Again, cutting on the bias does make it stretchy. So if you're going for a sort of tailored look, that's maybe not a great idea. But if you're going to the buffet, I say it's a total win. Your decision. So I cut out 2 pieces. Because it's on the bias, we can't cut it on the fold. And then I sewed those together, ironed that seam open, and then folded it in half lengthways. You can also fold it into quarters because it's basically acting like a giant bias tape at this point. Then you'll want to pin one of those edges right sides together to the top of the shorts and sew that down, making sure that you're catching all of the bulk of those darts in. Don't make this seam allowance too shallow. Then iron that back up, but be careful not to uniron the rest of the piece that you've just ironed. And you can see how it will actually fold back down neatly and cover all of that excess top. At this point, you can sew that down and then add the zipper, but that would add a lot of excess sort of bulk that without a serger would look quite raw at the top of the shorts. So instead of doing that, I decided to sew the zipper in first. I did this by hand and I did it in a back stitch just because everything was getting quite close together and complex now, and I wanted to make sure I got everything right. A back stitch is great because you're going to be using the zipper a lot and you want something really strong to hold that down. You will actually want to machine down the side edge. Just use a loose stitch, back stitch when you get to the point that the zipper would finish, and then sew the rest down as normal. Then seam rip that open down to the end of the zipper or to the back stitch, and you'll find that it's a very clean and flat finish. Then we need to be finishing the waistband. Again, you could use a machine and stitch in the ditch, as it were, but I find that that's pretty impossible to catch everything, and I don't want to be seam ripping or undoing anything unnecessarily here. So I decided to fold that down, fold in all of the edges, and do that by hand again, this time with a slip stitch. Now I know a lot of people go for a whip stitch in this sort of instance, and no offense, you can tell every time. You're basically just taking a bit from the top, a bit from the bottom, keeping the needle pretty parallel to the seam that you're sewing. A whip stitch kind of goes on the diagonal, and you see those diagonal stitches as you go. So I definitely recommend doing a slip stitch. You can see the difference here. Last off, hem the legs. I actually folded it twice towards the outside of the garment and then folded up once again for that sort of cuffed look, but obviously you can hem it in any way you please. And here's the final product.
Ladies and gentlemen.
So that's it. I hope that you learnt something following along. I know I did a lot with this project and I'm pretty happy with the skills that I picked up doing this. Definitely the cleanest zipper I've done. I'm not too happy with the hem, but I know that that's pretty easy to redo if I want it. I have worn these shorts out and they didn't rip in public, so that's a win. And there you go. I'll see you guys soon.